This is the amazing story of how Paul McCartney overcame near-death experiences and the defection of his bandmates to produce his most commercially successful and critically acclaimed post-Beatles album, Band on the Run. After the commercial failure of Wildlife and mixed reviews for Red Rose Speedway, Paul was fired up to deliver something really special. In the summer of 1973, Paul reconvened with Wings at his High Park farm in Scotland to rehearse tracks for the new album. Following arguments over financial arrangements and musical differences, Henry McCulloch quit. On the eve of recording sessions, Denny Sywell also left. Paul decided not to recruit a new drummer or lead guitarist, electing to play bass, drums, percussion, and most of the guitar parts himself. Paul had planned to record somewhere warm and sunny. Scanning over a list of EMI studios, his eyes alighted on Lagos in Nigeria. Research was basic. Paul was totally unaware of the undeveloped nature of the country, scarred by a bloody civil war and under the control of a military government. Corruption was rife, as was cholera, typhoid and yellow fever, with leopards seen wandering the streets. To cap it all, they arrived during the height of the monsoon season. Paul, Linda, their three kids, Denny Lane and former Beatles engineer Geoff Emerick flew from Gatwick to Lagos. Emerick records the studio was very primitive, amounting to a shed and an 8-track. There were no isolation booths and acoustic screens, so carpenters were enlisted to hurriedly build them. Everyone, including Paul, helped. The studio was located right next door to EMI's noisy and stiflingly humid pressing plant, separated by a single soundproof door. During one break on a Friday night, the group visited The Shrine, an open-air club, to see huge local celebrity and Afrobeat pioneer Fela Ransom Kuti and his band African 70 play. The following day, Fela and a group of 40 bodyguards commandeered the EMI control room, and Fela accused Paul of stealing African music. After Paul played the tapes, Ginger Baker, who had his own studios in Lagos, drove over and managed to defuse the situation. On another day, near the end of the sessions, Paul and Linda decided to go for a walk, contrary to advice not to leave their apartment due to safety concerns. They were soon stopped by a car containing 6 robbers, one of whom was brandishing a knife. Linda screamed, "Don't kill him! He's a musician! Leave him alone!" Paul added, "What do you want? Money here. Take it," and handed over some cash. The robbers demanded their bags, and these were duly handed over, containing the demo tapes recorded in Scotland. To heighten the tension further, when Paul and Linda returned to their villa, there was another power cut. The following day, in the studio, Paul fainted and was rushed to a local hospital by car. The diagnosis was a bronchial spasm, probably the result of some extremely strong Nigerian weed. After resting a further 2 days, Paul and Linda returned to Gatwick Airport and gave a press conference. "It was a great experience," said McCartney, "and we had no problems whatsoever." Fraught as the Lagos sessions were, they were at least extremely productive, with 7 tracks recorded over this 2-week period. Back in London, work commenced on the album at George Martin's Air Studios, located on the 4th floor of the Peter Robinson department store in Oxford Street. There, the group recorded Jet, Bluebird, Linda's Oriental Nightfish, which was used for another project, and a pounding piano number, which would later be titled 1984. Saxophonist Howie Casey, formerly of Merseybeat band Derry and the Seniors, made superb contributions to both Bluebird and Jet. He would go on to join the Wings Over the World tour in 1975. Helen Wheels was released as a single, ahead of the album, the McCartneys' nickname for their Land Rover. Then Tony Visconti was hired to provide orchestration to 7 tracks. The title track alone, Band on the Run, used 60 players, whereas No Words used just a string quartet. Paul, as usual, drew heavily on what was going on around him. The main theme of the album was escape and rebirth. The title track was inspired by a comment made by George Harrison amidst the protracted business discussions over Apple. Jet was inspired by the name of a Labrador the McCartneys acquired in London. Various accounts suggest that Bluebird was written in Jamaica, well before the album was recorded. Whilst Mrs. Vanderbilt was inspired by English music hall Charlie Chester's catchphrase, "Down in the jungle, living in a tent, better than a bungalow, no rent." "Let Me Roll It" was once more inspired by a quote from George Harrison from "I'd Have You Anytime." Mamounir, which means safe haven in Arabic, was written earlier in the year in Marrakesh, based on the name of the hotel where the McCartneys stayed with all five then of Wings in February. Previous guests had included Winston Churchill, Charlie Chaplin, Alfred Hitchcock, and the Rolling Stones. Picasso's last words, "Drink to Me," arose out of a dinner party challenge by Dustin Hoffman for Paul to write a song based solely on a random magazine article which happened to be about the death of Pablo Picasso. This was the only track to be recorded at Ginger Baker's ARC studios in Lagos, with Ginger guesting on lead shakers in the fade-out. No Words was the first song credited to both Paul McCartney and Denny Lane, and was written but unused for Red Rose Speedway. Wings roadies Ian Horn and Trevor Jones joined in the backing vocals. Impressed by Pink Floyd's album covers, Paul hired Hypnosis to create the artwork. Clive Arrowsmith, a photographer from Liverpool who had been a classmate of Lennon's, was commissioned. Following a boozy lunch at San Martino, an Italian restaurant in Knightsbridge, the cast for the cover shoot convened at Osterley House in West London. Local celebrities of the day included TV interviewer Michael Parkinson, British boxer John Conte, actors James Coburn and Christopher Lee, and the politician Clement Freud were shot to create a prison escape photo in a clear nod to Sgt. Pepper. The album also included a poster of Linda's Polaroids, providing a fascinating glimpse inside the primitive Lagos studio. When the tapes for the album arrived in the US, Capitol Records VP of Marketing requested McCartney to include Helen Wheels in a track list. Paul acquiesced, but Helen Wheels failed to appear on the UK pressing of the album. The LP was released on both sides of the Atlantic at the end of the first week of December, a couple of weeks after Mind Games. The American version of the album hit the US charts in the last week of 1973 and headed up to number 1 on the 13th of April 1974. Capitol's decision to release half the album tracks as singles prolonged the album's stay on the charts, and it returned to the top for a second time on the 8th of June and a third time on the 6th of July. In the UK, Paul would have to wait until the 27th of July for Band on the Run to finally hit the top, where it remained in the top 40 for over 100 weeks. In all, sales of over 6 million were extremely impressive, considering the album was not even supported by a tour. In 1975, Lennon told Rolling Stone that Band on the Run was a great album. You can call them Wings, but it's Paul McCartney music. And it's good stuff. It's good, Paul music. The album has all the hallmarks of a late Beatles period collection, with sublime melodies, grand orchestral sweeps, and hard-driving rock songs. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe for more.